TopMedTalk.
My name's Nick Margerrison and this is TopMedTalk. And on today's TopMedTalk, we're going to take a little bit of time to speak to our editor-in-chief. And that is, of course, Professor Monty Mythen, the originator of TopMedTalk.
How are you, Nick?
I'm good, man. Yeah, I'm going to talk to you about TopMedTalk. I'm going to ask you how it came about. I'm going to ask you what inspires you to do it and what's behind all of this. And I'm going to start with how did it start?
It started by a visit to this building, Martin Howe's property here, the studio at 1010 Great West Road, where I was introduced to this beautiful studio, which has the ability to make these podcasts and communicate with the world. And that prompted me to revisit what I used to call carbon-friendly conferencing, along with a colleague of mine, Hugh Montgomery. You know, basically, we should be communicating with much more of the world more effectively, whilst staying close to home and burning fewer air miles. So that's really what it's all about.
Well, that brings me to the next question. Why podcast? Why not video?
Many of us have been involved in quite a lot of video lecture experiences. You know, there's plenty of it out there now. And when you look at the number of views, they're relatively disappointing compared to what we see the numbers of people downloading podcasts. So you reflect on that and think, well, how often am I going to actually watch a screen and choose to watch somebody giving a scientific lecture? And it's pretty rare, actually. If I'm going to watch a screen, I'm probably going to watch sport or a film, as I'm sure many people do, and I talk to the youngsters about this. They associate screen time with me time, you know, with relaxing. Whereas podcasting, whether it's in the car, when you're commuting, on an aeroplane, whatever it is, it's just a different way of catching up. Very easy to say, well, actually, I don't want screen time at the minute. I do need to get through this. It's good for me. It's just come up on the radio in my car, effectively, because if you use the technology correctly, and great, bring it on.
So the focus of TopMedTalk is perioperative medicine, the perioperative process.
Overall, the ambition for TopMedTalk is to deal with all medically, clinically, population health related issues. We've started with perioperative medicine in the broadest sense because that's where myself and my colleagues primarily come from.
So for the uninitiated, what is perioperative? What does that mean?
So perioperative medicine, often described as from the moment of contemplation of surgery until full recovery. Now, a moment of contemplation of surgery, sure, some people do wake up one morning and say, I really think I'm going to go and see my doctor because I think I might need a knee replacement or a hip replacement. But the moment of contemplation of surgery in many situations is when your doctor says, I'm going to refer you in to see a surgeon because you might need something done to make you better. So it's really, perioperative medicine is from that moment, whichever one of those moments it is, through to wonderful, I'm fixed now, I've forgotten about my surgery, I'm home, I'm happy, I'm back to a full productive life and I'm paying taxes again.
You know, I've known you for a while now, and this is something that I'd really like to get to the bottom of. Why is it that you're so passionate about that? What started that passion? So
that passion really started me as a young doctor, being involved in giving an anaesthetic. So my primary trade is the delivery of anaesthesia to facilitate surgery. And some poor elderly gentleman had a very poor outcome from the surgery. It was difficult, complicated emergency surgery. But I reflected on it all and thought, well, actually, broadly speaking, we all could have done better here. Maybe he shouldn't have had the surgery at all. Once he needed the surgery, there's many things, I think, that on reflection we could have done better. And I sort of thought, well, particularly when it comes to elective surgery, when you sign on the dotted line to say, thank you, doctors, thank you, surgeon, you're going to make me better, the fact that you might be worse just shouldn't happen. We've got to get to a point where that's not one of the options.
What do you mean by poor outcome?
I then went on to do detailed research looking as part of my higher degree thesis. I'd already qualified, done my qualifications, and I was lucky enough to get a grant to study patients in great detail, their physiology and their outcomes. And when you go and visit the patients every day of the week and you make notes in a diary about how they're getting on, it was a bit disturbing as to how many people were just not quite right afterwards. And the not quite right is the whole spectrum of my wounds taking a little bit more time to heal than I expected, through to I appear to have had a stroke or in some situations now dead, and that really changed my life forever.
So why does the perioperative process give you a better outcome?
Well, if we agree that we try and have zero tolerance of poor outcomes from major surgery, so a long-term interest in outcomes of patients following, in particular, more major surgeries, those you'd expect to have to go to a hospital for, and the belief that we should have zero tolerance of anything other than an improvement following surgery. The reality is that major complications occur in anything up to a sort of quarter of patients, which just isn't good enough. Then the whole process is all about mitigating and managing risk. So we can all think of ways that we could give ourselves a better chance, things like getting fitter, giving up smoking if we're a smoker, drinking less if we drink too much, fixing our diabetes, our anemia, that long list of things. And then when we get into have the surgery itself, there are multiple steps. It is a complex pathway, but we should be applying best evidence-based practice as consistently as possible. And when that is done, outcomes are much better.
There are a number of different debates that get thrown up by the perioperative process. Do you want to give us an idea of, first of all, from a UK perspective, and then let's move to the slightly more complicated area of America?
On a very positive note to start with, we have common goals. I used to work in the United States of America, so 20 years ago there was quite a divide in the US view of delivery of healthcare and the UK view of healthcare. We're now very mid-Atlantic, I would say, so we are speaking a very common language with very common objectives through the whole thing. One of the big challenges we still have, which is often discussed on TopMedTalk, is the way the healthcare systems are funded. So we're still, I think, so privileged still in the United Kingdom to have our National Health Service, this single-payer, single-provider system that dominates with a small amount of private practice in parallel. The United States is travelling a very, very difficult journey, as they describe it, from volume to value. And what is meant by that is the volume equation is the fee-for-service model, whereas the value equation is much more akin to what we have in the National Health Service. And you can imagine if your business is medicine, more medicine is more money, then perversely, even though we all want major complications not to happen, major complications are good business because there's more sickness and there are more tests to do and more drugs to give out and more patients to see. Now that's all being changed to what's much more akin to what we have in the United Kingdom. That's this concept of accountable care organisations, of having a certain amount of money per patient in your system, and the idea of receiving a bundled payment. So if we agree that right price for a hip replacement is this number of thousands of pounds, that's what the people are going to get for performing that hip replacement. So the best possible result gives you the greatest likelihood of keeping a margin for doing that, which is going to make your, let's call it business, your hospital, profitable.
So one of the areas that often comes up in TopMedTalk is the question of whether or not doctors should advocate healthy lifestyles. Yeah. And that's a debate that varies depending on which side of the Atlantic you're on. Do you want to speak to that?
Well, I think we all agree we should advocate healthy lifestyles, and we should probably try harder to lead by example. So one of the things that is reflected on quite often is if you go into a hospital, you often look around and say, I'm not really staring at a whole bunch of healthy people in the various different uniforms and whatever they might be wearing here. Some of these people look as though they should be leading by example. So, yes, we should advocate healthy lifestyles, but we should also try hard to lead by example. We often reflect on the fact that if you come to one of our meetings in various different places, our food that's put on the table often includes, multiple biscuits, cookies, cakes, fried food, everything we're telling other people not to do. We're not overwhelmed with fresh fruit and carb-free dining.
There's a bit of pushback, though, from patients, isn't there? Particularly, I suppose, if they're paying a fee, if they get a doctor telling them to live healthily, some people, that gets up their noses, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I think you have to dole out some tough love. You have to be honest with people, and we have skirted around some of those issues because we've been a bit worried about exactly what you've stated. In other words, if in the private practice I'm a paying customer, don't tell me what to do. But we are duty bound, I think, to share the truth on those matters.
Okay.
And sometimes it's difficult because we're sharing truths that we can't quite manage to get under control ourselves. A little bit overweight maybe, not quite exercising as much as one should.
One of the things that comes up a lot is the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
What is the opioid crisis for the UK audience? And then do you want to expand on it a little as to whether or not the medical profession's contributed to that?
Well, the opioid crisis is definitely in play in the United Kingdom and in much of the world now, but it's most often discussed in a US context. So it's now a death from opioids, from narcotics, in other words, heroin-like drugs, opium poppy-like drugs, is now one of the major killers in the United States of America. And within that is this disturbing reality that many of the drugs that become available, particularly in tablet form, have got into the community as a result of them being prescribed for patients who've had surgery, and prescribed in quite shocking quantities. So some of the examples we've talked about on TopMedTalk is youngsters, teenagers under the age of 18, having teeth extractions, for example, and going home with 90 OxyContin tablets. Now, it's unlikely that they need any of those tablets, and if they don't take those tablets, it appears as though not many people dispose of them properly, so they end up in bathroom cabinets and end up possibly being used for other reasons, for social reasons, or redistributed into the community in so-called pill mills, being sold as street drugs, because some of the tablet forms in particular that we in the broadest sense, the community has worked very hard to produce pain-killing drugs that have the fewest possible side effects. That combination makes them the most addictive.
So I've been travelling around America largely with you, going to conferences, and I can tell that you love the work you do. Yeah. That's obvious. And I can also tell that a lot of people enjoy meeting you, and they're excited to meet you, and they obviously enjoy the work that you do as well. What would you say is the most personally rewarding aspect of what it is that you do?
I think that if you, as a result of communication, particularly listening to people and then being able to share that listening with a broader audience, is if you see large-scale change for the better, which I think we have in a number of situations. I'm not in any way, shape or form saying that that I did that, but I think that we, communicators, have helped to make those things happen, and that definitely gives me a warm, fuzzy feeling where I think, well, the needle has moved, the dial has moved, and we collectively who've tried to share this information and drive the knowledge base and make sure that we share that as effectively as possible have helped to move that needle in the right direction. And then what can listeners to TopMedTalk expect in the future? Expect in the future more, better, faster, thinner, better looking. It's going to be wonderful. That's the great thing about radio. Yeah. You just need to get people with good voices. Yeah, that's all you need, isn't it? You got it in the bag. Thanks for being with us, man. Thank you. TopMedTalk.